I love the Atari 2600. Sure, it's an incredibly primitive games system, and true, many of its games are best played in short bursts. The thing is though, even if it wasn't the first dedicated home games system, it was the one which popularised gaming at home. Beyond that though, it had a spark that I found many of its peers and immediate successors kind of lacked, and that's why over 40 years later it still feels an incredibly special system to me. And with a few other things which have happened in Space Year 2022, which also includes some friends actually joining in the fray and acquiring their own consoles, I couldn't help but feel like taking a little trip into checking out some Atari 2600 games. Now, when putting this list together, there's a few things to know. Firstly, this isn't my top 10, just a bunch of those I find rather interesting. Along with that, the games I've chosen are those with somewhat of a single-player focus. And thirdly, they were released officially in PAL format. I'm in Australia, I run a PAL console, that's what I've got here. Finally, I'm choosing to focus on the classic portion of the 2600's catalogue in this video, as I think a separate one dedicated to more of the modern and homebrew games would be worth its own dive in and exploration. So with all that out of the way, let's look at some Atari 2600 games I just think are neat. Starting off, we have iMagic's Cosmic Ark, developed by Rob Fulop and published in 1982. This one serves as a follow-up of sorts to Atlantis, at least with that game's downer of an ending. You're in charge of the titular Ark, containing the survivors of Atlantis, and your mission is to travel across your home star system and rescue as many creatures as possible before the star goes boom and extinguishes all remaining life. Your journey to each planet has two phases. The first tasks you with protecting the Ark during its flight by blasting away incoming meteors, by nudging the joystick to fire shots towards them. When you've cleared enough out, you'll dispatch a shuttle and proceed to the surface. You'll need to be quick here, as you've only got a brief window of opportunity to rescue the creatures before the Ark is under threat by more meteors. All the while, you'll have to avoid the planetary defences, which will force you to drop a creature should you be blasted. Successfully rescuing both earns you extra energy, which obviously keeps you going, as should the Ark take enough hits from meteors, it'll be drained, leading to the Ark's destruction and the game ending. What makes Cosmic Ark so appealing to me is its use of multiple gameplay mechanics. It's not that common on the 2600 to see games mix things up like this, so I appreciate seeing how the gameplay is mixed up. As a result, both of these sub-games are simple in their own right, but they offer up some challenge once you get a few rounds in, slowly becoming more and more intense in the ways that many games of this time tend to be. It's a little thing that makes Cosmic Ark stand out quite well amongst many an action game on the system, at least in my book, and one definitely worth taking some time to check out. Next up, it's time to take to the road in Activision's Enduro, created by Larry Miller. In this 1983 racing game, you're challenged to survive as many days as possible in a cross-country rally. To qualify for the next day, you'll have to pass the required number of cars before dawn arrives. It may sound simple to start with, but this rally is not an easy one to master. Sure, you'll be racing on the open road to begin with, but it's not long before you're sliding about on icy roads trying to avoid your rivals. Then, as you drive into the night, you'll have to be extra cautious, as all you can see is their tail lights. Before you run into the fog, that is, which limits it even further. Enduro puts a nice spin on the arcade racer for the 2600, and as you'd expect coming from Activision, it offers some slick visuals and a great use of the 2600's colour capabilities in showing all the times of day and environments you'll drive through. More importantly, is that it's a game which is great to zone out to, especially as you race at breakneck speed through a pack of rivals, pixels away from collisions which will slow you to a crawl, costing you valuable time should you mess up. Enduro is one of those games I put plenty of time into as a kid. It stands out pretty high up on my list of favourites for the machine. And honestly, it's also probably the finest racing game you'll find on the 2600. And even today, it still offers up plenty of fun should you want to take to the road. Of all the games I'm covering in this video, it's Ed Riddle's Indy 500, which happens to be the oldest, being the 11th game released for the console by Atari themselves in 1978. Like most of the 2600's launch games, Indy 500 is also an adaptation of one of Atari's arcade titles, this time the various sprint games. In itself, it's a unique concept to have on the machine, but what really makes Indy 500 special is its controls. Unlike the rest of the library, it doesn't use the joysticks or paddles which were included with the console. Instead, it's played with an included pair of driving controllers. Now these aren't like your regular paddles, rather they spin 360 degrees, but they give you a lot of excellent control for the car. Indy 500 offers a variety of game modes, both when playing solo and with a friend. You'll have a pair of traditional races, as well as races on iced out courses, where you've really got to learn how to master driving the car, so you don't slip and slide about on the track. The goal here is obviously to get as many laps as possible, and the first to win in two-player mode is by getting the goal laps first, and in solo mode it's just a time trial. There are also some special modes as well. Crash and Score has you racing to crash into an item. Again, in two-player mode, it's whoever gets the goal target first, and in solo, it's how many you can get in 60 seconds. There's also Tag, the lone mode here which requires two players. One player starts as being it, and needs to tag the other player's car. The goal is to accumulate as many points as possible by avoiding the tagged player until one or the other earns 99 points. Admittedly, Indy 500 is probably the simplest game on the list here, but what really makes it stand out is the support for those driving controllers. They weren't the most popular of the alternate controllers available for the console, so it makes playing this feel so much more distinctive, especially when you compare it to, say, Sprint Master, another style racer for the machine which came much later but only played with joystick. It just doesn't feel as good as it does here, so playing Indy 500 with a pair of driving controllers on the original hardware is something which has to be experienced. Simulating pinball, or at least attempting to do so, is a mainstay of early computer and video games. And so, Midnight Magic, developed by Glenn Axworthy and published by Atari in 1986, has got to be one of the finest attempts to do so, at least on an early generation platform like the 2600. The goal is, unsurprisingly, quite simple. Score as many points as possible by knocking down targets, raising your score multiplier, and preventing the ball from being drained as long as possible. Unsurprisingly, the table may not be as detailed compared to those which you'll find on pinball games for more advanced systems. It's still one I find which presents plenty of challenges. You learn about mastering the game's ball physics, which unsurprisingly is paramount to nailing those targets situated at the top of the table, as once you take them out, you'll up the multiplier and really start to rack in those points. As seen with many later games for the 2600, there isn't a variety of modes on offer here, really just the ability to play alone or against a friend taking turns. Plus, of course, you can increase the challenge by making the kickbacks something you'll always have available, or something you'll need to activate by triggering the right drop targets. This lack of options is something I don't really feel is an issue. Midnight Magic is a pinball game which offers a lot of the thrills of pinball, even on hardware as limited as the 2600 just so happens to be. So, if you're someone who enjoys a more simpler style of pinball game, then I think you're going to find quite a lot to enjoy with Midnight Magic. If it's one thing I've espoused on the channel over the years, it's the idea that I love how modern games for vintage systems take cues from modern design traits we'll see on modern systems. Games that, go for more than just 3 lives and it's game over. And when it comes to this game, Pitfall 2 Lost Caverns, well, we see that it's a game from 1983, developed by David Crane, that really offers a very modern sense of design, which is quite outstanding for a system like the 2600. The original Pitfall was a more arcade style of challenge. The stakes with Pitfall 2, though, are quite different in this adventure. This time, Pitfall Harry needs to recover the Raj Diamond, alongside finding his niece Rhonda and the cowardly cat Quickclaw. All elements from the Pitfall cartoon, which I'll admit I never really saw as a kid. All of this, of course, involves you running around the lost caverns, working your way deeper and deeper into them. Of course, you need to avoid the hazards and learn some of the tricks of moving about, like the balloons, which will let you float up to some of those inner chambers. But when I talked about the modern aspects to Pitfall 2's design, it really comes down to how death is handled. Gone are the 3 lives of the original game. In its place, you'll find a series of checkpoints. These are activated by walking over them, and should Pitfall Harry run into a trap or a creature, you'll just be taken back to the last one you passed over, with a penalty being applied to your score. And so, true mastery of Pitfall 2 requires a perfect run, collecting all the gold bars located around the caverns, alongside the main objectives. But the true challenge comes from doing it without falling down too far or running into the enemies, because those are going to take away points, preventing you from that perfect score. Now, my first encounter with Pitfall 2 was actually not this 2600 version. Rather, it was on another machine, and I was very underwhelmed with the game. But when I discovered that it did appear on the 2600 and I tried it out, I was incredibly impressed with what was done here. Despite the limitations of the hardware, there's actually some custom processing in the cartridge that, in a way, has led the groundwork to what we have these days with modern 2600 games. And so coming back to it all this time later, Pitfall 2 still sits as an incredibly special game for the Atari 2600, and really is one of those games that you could show as really pushing the sensibilities of design and the hardware incredibly far. And so it's a special game to check out indeed, and I'm sure you'll find it better than quite a few later entries in the series. If any game for the Atari 2600 could be considered iconic, then for my money, it would have to be Carol Shaw's River Raid, published by Activision in 1982. Right off the bat, this offers a straightforward, no-nonsense concept. Take charge of a fighter aircraft and travel down the endless river of no return, blasting all the enemies you'll encounter. All of this while flying over fuel tanks to keep your jet topped up and in the air. Where River Raid excels though is in the challenge. The opening stages offer a few simple enemies and plenty of fuel tanks to fly over as you travel down wide open rivers. As you work your way further and further down them, things become more and more complex. Additional enemies enter the fray, the river becomes narrower and narrower, and the distance between fuel tanks increases, meaning you're going to need to fly over every single one of them in order to survive. In doing this, it offers a gentle starting point for players to master controlling their fighter, which is great, as you're going to truly need to keep a measured hand on the joystick to maintain control through some of those later levels where things are incredibly tight. The thing which always sold the Atari 2600 over other consoles of the time to me is just how smooth its games were in action, and River Raid truly puts that technical trickery into play here, with its smooth scrolling and tight responsive controls. If any game for the 2600 deserved to be built upon and expanded for a release into, say, the arcades, it absolutely should have been River Raid, which takes an incredibly simple concept and honestly gives you some major thrills and challenge as you're trying to rack up a high score, navigating your way down those rivers, and it makes it one that is always worth coming back to. Atari's Battlezone was one of those arcade games I felt would never have worked on the 2600, and honestly, it's quite a solid conversion. Though the truth is, I much prefer Activision's twist. Alan Miller's Robot Tank, yet again released in 1983. It offers a similar setup to that of Battlezone. Take charge of a tank and take on a force of enemies. These forces are made up of tanks which are quite similar to your own, and so to complete your mission, you're going to need to take out 12 squadrons of them, made up of 12 tanks apiece. You might feel facing the same type of enemy is rather limiting, but Robot Tank mixes things up by changing up the environment. You'll be fighting around the clock, with day turning into night and back to day, and randomised weather throwing the proverbial spanner in the works as well. Its best feature though for me is the damage system. Sure, an enemy shot might take you out of the picture, but not every time. Sometimes you find one of your systems might be taken out instead. Whether it's your cannons now firing at a reduced rate, or it's your radar, which is disabled, making enemies tougher to track. Possibly, it's your view screen failing, blanking out at inopportune moments whilst you're trying to line up a shot. Or your tank's treads might go, reducing your mobility and ability to evade enemy fire. This mechanic might not sound like much, but it truly takes it above being just a blast fest for me, as it introduces some major tension to the proceedings, because you can't repair any damage your tank gets, save for losing a life, and you really want to hold on to those as long as possible. Robot Tank is the kind of game that distills what makes this era of gaming so fun for me. Yes, it doesn't offer a load of depth or variety of gameplay options, but what it does offer is a well-executed shooter that offers a fresh challenge every time you play, because you're dealing with this confluence of AI and conditions and randomization. It doesn't always play out the same time you play, and I really love that in a game as challenging as this, as straightforward as it is, and it's one that I really enjoy going back to every so darn often. If there's one thing our next game, Solaris, does well, it's strike a near-perfect balance between frenetic action gameplay and something a little more tactical. Published in 1986 by Atari as one of the first of the Red Label releases, alongside the budget relaunch of the 2600, it channels the spirit of the legendary Star Raiders. Which is no surprise when you see it was coded by the same author, Doug Neubauer. The Xylons are back this time, and you're once again sent to take them out. Except this time, you've also got a few other objectives. Of these, the most important is finding the location of the lost world Solaris. You're also going to be called upon to defend allied planets from Xylon attacks, but you'll also have to take the fight to Xylon-occupied worlds as well. The latter is an important task to undertake because it's how you earn extra lives. Solaris offers a near constant sense of danger, and you are going to need to map your progress here, which is honestly quite a unique thing to say for a game released on the Atari 2600. But it's no surprise that it's the case, because as tastes in the game improve with the next generation of systems, well, to see those traits carry on down to a legendary platform like this, well, it's really a good thing in my book, showing that the 2600 is more than capable of just arcade action. Solaris was a game I was always impressed with as a kid, though I never really got much progress in it. Coming back to it now with the wizened experience of theoretical experience, I think my appreciation of it is so much higher now, because I truly understand how it all works and how it all fits together, and I can see that it's offering something so incredibly special as a result. Solaris for me is a top tier release on the Atari 2600, and honestly would be very high on my top games list on the console, and so it's one that is absolutely worth digging up and having a play on, especially because it's also found a bit of circulation in modern times, so definitely give it a spin if you're a fan of space combat with a little bit more attached to it. And now for my last pick. The iconic Yars Revenge, developed by Howard Scott Warshaw and published by Atari in 1981. It might have its roots in an attempted conversion of arcade game Star Castle, but the proposition to change it to what we got now is one which I feel works far better based on the standard of games of its time of release. Being in charge of the noble Yar, your goal is to battle the hostile Krutile threat by clearing a hole in the energy shield before you blast it using your Zulon cannon. All the while, you'll be dodging the Krutile's threats. Destroyer missiles which will seek you down, and of course the most dangerous one, the Swirl. This forms a neat gameplay loop as you're dodging the attacks, slowly clearing out the shield and acquiring what you need to fire the Zulon cannon to blast that Krutile. It really takes a simple concept and really just amps the challenge up as you'd expect. Now, the base game mode offers plenty of challenge, but the truth is the real joy of Yars Revenge comes from selecting one of the other game modes. These offer some neat twists, particularly around what it takes to activate the Zulon cannon, and in some ways makes it even a threat to you as it bounces back should it hit the energy shield. Though, as with any classic arcade-inspired game, Yars Revenge offers a simple concept, and pairs it with a set of mechanics that give you some thrilling action on the go. It might seem quite sedate on its first few levels, but go for one of those ultimate Yars game modes and get used to the new mechanics, and I'm sure you're going to find yourself enjoying the challenge of taking down the Krutile threat. Now that's a set of Atari 2600 games I just think are neat. Like I mentioned in the intro, I've got a lot of fondness for the console and its library, and sure, there are plenty of stinkers available for it, or games which really just don't offer a lot to them compared to those for newer systems. It's just, when I sit myself down in front of the 2600, I'm always finding myself having a blast with it. If it's a system that you're not really that familiar with, I hope this video inspires you to check some of the games out. But if you so are familiar with it, well, I'm sure you probably know these games, and if you don't, go give them a play anyway. I'm certainly up for spending more time talking about games I just think are neat, but the thing is, I need to know if it's worth the time to produce them. So if you enjoyed this video or found it worth your while, then do let me know. Discussion is the main reason I like making videos like this after all, especially when it's more than just about those nostalgic memories and vibes, or taking journeys back in time. I think it's an important thing to acknowledge these games and the history in their place, and showing that they do have some value besides these nostalgic curiosities. So if you think that's for you, then let me know, and I'm more than happy to put together more to talk about. But really, it's time to wrap this one up, and in fact wrap things up for the year. So I hope you and yours have a happy holiday, no matter how you choose to spend it. But more importantly, thank you all so very much for watching, and for your support of the show during what has ended up being a bit of a complex year. So thank you all again, and I'll see you in the new year.